Thank you. Sorry, everybody, for our few-minute delay there. Our computer decided to shut down on us right at noon, so we had to restart it. So anyway, thanks for being patient, and thanks for joining us for our small acreage webinar today on small-scale cattle production. My name is Jennifer Cook. I'm the Small Acreage Management Coordinator for the Front Range, and I work for Colorado State University Extension and the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Joining me today is Jason Ahola. He's an associate professor of beef production systems here at CSU campus. So thanks for joining us, Jason. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few things. On the bottom left-hand corner of your screen is the chat window that you can use to communicate with us. So behind the scenes is Ruth Wilson, who's our IT specialist. So if you have problems or technical difficulties throughout the presentation, you can use that chat box to communicate with her, and she'll hopefully be able to help work out whatever problems you're having. Otherwise, we'd like to ask that you keep your comments and questions for Jason until the end of the presentation. So the format for today is that Jason's talk will probably be about 45 minutes, and we'll have 10 to 15 minutes for question and answer at the end. Finally, I'd like to thank our sponsor for today, Livestock for Landscapes, for sponsoring the webinar, as well as our host, Colorado State Extension. So I think I've covered everything, so without further ado, the poll. Yes, we need to do the poll. So we have a few questions just to get to know who you are, to help us and to help Jason as he presents. So the first question, I know several people are watching in groups, so you can answer more than one answer for question one. So describe your experience with cattle production. And we'll leave a few minutes for you to go ahead and answer. And then the second question is, please rate your knowledge of beef and dairy cattle production before the webinar. And while you're answering these, just a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and will be available probably this afternoon or tomorrow on the Small Acreage Management website of the Colorado State University Extension. So it looks like everybody has answered, and many of you are just considering raising cattle for meat. That looks like the majority. And you have no or some knowledge. All right. So I'll let Ruth clear that screen, or can you save it actually, Ruth, for us? Thank you. And I'll turn the mic over to Jason to get started.
Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks for the invitation to participate in the webinar today. I think it's a great technology and allows everybody to be able to take just a little bit of time for the presentation, and no one has to travel anywhere, and it's a great way to interact. So I look forward to speaking today, and also look forward to the program that you're going to hold this fall, which I think would be a great opportunity to follow up on some things that maybe I don't have time to cover today. Okay, so Jennifer said that that's not much is known about that. Basically, in October, there's going to be a meeting that will serve as a follow-up to this presentation, maybe some other ones, and we're going to try to address some things more specifically, whether it's nutrition or marketing. And so I think at the end of this presentation, there's going to be a chance to provide some feedback in this same kind of polling. So certainly would welcome that. It helps us to be able to provide the presentation that matches what you're looking for. So what I wanted to do is just give you a quick overview here of what I was going to approach today. It's a bit of a challenging topic because there is so much background and diversity. It does look like most of the people listening today are considering the beef industry. A few folks have been in it for a while. So hopefully there's a little bit for everyone in this. The big things is to talk about today's beef cattle industry. I'll talk a little bit about dairy, but it'll be mostly beef cattle. In terms of, is there profit potential? What are the opportunities in the industry? Go through a little bit of the production scenario options for producers who are considering being in the business or considering expanding maybe the cattle that they have. And then I try to give my perspective of everything from pros and cons to challenges, needs, marketing associated with small-scale beef cattle production. And I wanted to kind of just start off with a bit of a 30,000-foot view in terms of Being a small acreage producer, why are we doing that? Why are we involved in that part of the business? And from my perspective, I think most people fit into these three categories. Um, Probably one of the big ones is to live an agricultural way of life and having livestock or animals, and just being around that, and oftentimes a semi-rural, in some cases semi-urban setting. The other major one, I think, is to produce our own food. There's more and more desire to do that, I think, these days. And then the other one is to generate income. Unfortunately, the last one is probably the hardest one to do, but we'll try to talk through some of that today. And I am in a position here at CSU and teach a lot of students who are going back to large commercial cow-calf operations, but I actually grew up in a very small acreage, 10-acre, 6-cow beef operation. My family still has cows. My uncle raises about 10 steers a year for freezer beef. So I have a pretty close connection with small acreage beef production, and hopefully I'll be able to share some of that with you today. So beyond this, why are we into small acreage beef production? I think there's a couple of trade-offs that we have to acknowledge. One is we simply don't have an economy of scale. We don't have a large number of animals to go out and spread the purchase of a new pickup truck across, or purchase of equipment or land or those kind of things. We just have a lot of overhead versus the number of animals. Unfortunately, a big thing is limited resources. When it comes down to acreage, there's not a lot of grass or forage production. And I think we have to be realistic in saying a small acreage producer, very, very few producers can actually be a very low-cost producer because of these reasons of economies of scale, land resources, and that sort of thing. Opportunities for small acreage producers, I think one of the things is for most people it's not the sole source of income. Yes, it can provide some supplemental income, but it's not the only source of income. And actually that, I think, can allow producers to be able to tolerate a little bit more risk so that they can maybe do something that a large producer wouldn't do because that is their only source of income. The other thing I think we need to realize is oftentimes if you live in that urban-rural interface and have a small acreage, you may have marketing abilities or skills. For instance, your day job might be interacting with people, and you need to take advantage of that when you raise beef to try to add value to the products or animals that you're producing. So that's something I'm going to talk about a little bit more today. So the first thing is there much profit in the production of cattle for beef? And the really positive news today, even though we are somewhat in a recession, global demand for red meat is huge and increasing. And this chart is from 1960 till 2007, and there was a 400% increase in the demand for red meat. The U.S. had an increase, but it was not nearly as substantial. And as we see countries like India and China getting more wealth in their populations, there's going to be increased demand for red meat. So not only domestically, but in the world, as wealth increases, people move from chicken to pork to beef in terms of their protein source. So I think you need to realize that the value of red meat or beef in the future is going to continue to increase. It's not going to decrease for anything in the near future. However, the biggest challenge, or maybe the bad news, is winter feed cost is the single largest cost on beef cattle operations. Somewhere around 60 to 80% of the total variable cost is feed cost, or this winter feed cost for a cattle operation. So you have to balance that with this potential upside for selling your product. One of the ways to kind of hit home on this is to look at this chart from Cattle Facts, which looked at the relative increases in price of a series of commodities, and that's hay, corn, pasture, oil, fertilizer. You can see they've all increased 50 to over 100%. So 100% would be double what it was historically. And then at the same time on the far right, that red bar is for a 750-pound steer ready to go into a feedlot, has only increased 23%. So unfortunately, the inputs are increasing in cost faster than the outputs are increasing in value. I think that's going to stabilize a little bit, but that's certainly a trend for the foreseeable future, is to try to balance those two aspects. Just to kind of emphasize this and see where are we today with beef cattle prices, these are some numbers from Cattle Facts, which is a group in Denver that publishes market reports. And I've got on there May of 2011 and all the prices. So that's basically today. May of 2010, that's a year ago. The dollar change in that time, and then the percent change. And if you go down, you can see the top one is the price of a carcass on a per hundredweight basis is quite high versus historical values, but it's only changed a little bit since a year ago. A steer that's being slaughtered is about $13 or 11% above a year ago. 750-pound feeder steers and 550-pound steer calves are higher, and you can see that percentage is increasing as we get closer to the cow-calf level. Cull cows that are no longer productive, they've increased quite a bit, but the big thing we've seen an increase in is about a 50% increase in corn price in just the past 12 months. And historically, corn was only worth about $2.50 a bushel. So it's almost triple historical levels. So you can see there's increasing in prices for these commodities, but the input has certainly been a challenge. So I wanted to just highlight the average corn price in the last 100 years. And you can see from the early 1900s, it was like 72 cents a bushel. And then for a 30-year period after World War II, it was $1.27. A 30-year period up until just 5 years ago, it was at $2.38. And then it has basically gone into this new level around 2010 or so of $4. But this graph is actually a little bit dated. It's about 6 months old. So I put here on today's price of corn, which is in the upper right-hand corner, is $6.76 a bushel. So you can see how much corn has increased. I wish I had a graph that also showed how much hay has increased. I don't, but I guarantee you it has pretty much taken the same trend. Because if corn is worth a lot of money, people plow up cornfield. If corn is worth a lot of money, people plow up an alfalfa field and plant corn in it. So therefore, you have less hay production. The price of hay goes up. All of these commodities kind of float with each other. So it's certainly in the last 4 to 5 years, we've seen tremendous increases in prices for feed. I think a lot of that's driven by ethanol, but there's a whole bigger discussion as part of that. So what has this done to the beef cattle business? We've basically lost about 10,000 beef cattle operations per year in the last 30 years. And I think that's going to continue. And so anyone with one cow up to 100,000 cows would be considered in this list of 750,000 producers that are currently in the business. And as producers have gone out of business, also the beef cow inventory has really dropped. So you can see here on this slide, 2011 beef cow numbers. It's one of the smallest beef cow herds in the United States in about 60 years. So there's very, very low amount of beef cow numbers, particularly when you look back to the 1980s. So if you think about that early slide I had where demand is increasing, while at the same time supply is decreasing, which honestly is a good thing for beef cattle prices. There'll be sort of meeting in the middle where there's only so much beef to go around, price will go up on that. So the one challenge to all of this is that cow-calf returns or profit to cow-calf producers was really good for this period of time from about 2000 or 1998 until about 2008. A lot of profit was made. You can see here about an average of $100 per cow for a 10-year period. But unfortunately today, we're actually right around break even or maybe even losing money because of these very high input prices for corn and for hay. So what are we faced with in terms of having cattle? I think all of these species on this slide, chickens in the upper right and pigs in the lower right, and then cattle, they all depend on feed, but the benefit is the two species on the right, chickens and pigs, only depend on corn. And corn is very expensive today, and if oil stays anywhere close to where it is, it will continue to be expensive. Cattle, on the other hand, can take advantage of a resource that really has no other value, and that's grass, by using their rumen and this fermentation vat. So something to think about going forward. If you're considering these different species, cattle have a competitive advantage in that they can use a low quality, lower priced commodity to convert that into muscle and therefore meat and food products. I don't want to get into a lot of the science behind this, but just for those of you who are curious, how does this happen? This is sort of my fake rumen here, that this big white circle, and I've got the bloodstream at the top, and then in the lower right is the small intestine. And just to go through, why is a cow, why does it provide so much more of an advantage than a chicken or a pig, is because of this rumen. So if a cow consumes forage, which is packed with energy, but the thing is that a cow needs to be able to take advantage of that. So in the middle there, I've got all these little yellow circles, which are little microbes or tiny little bugs that digest the feed stuff. They utilize nitrogen in the rumen, and the bugs grow larger and release something called volatile fatty acids, which is the energy source for a ruminant. In a pig or a chicken or a human, that's glucose. In a ruminant, it's something called propionic acid or butyric acid. It's released based on these microbes' activity. The microbes die down here in the lower right, and they actually are digested in the small intestine, and their bodies are broken down and they provide protein to the animal, which goes up here to the bloodstream. So we're able to take a feed over on the left, like wheat straw, that has very, very little protein and very low quality, and convert it to microbial protein for the animal. So we can talk more about this in October, but this whole system depends on us feeding the microbes so that they're happy, so that they can release energy and protein from the feed stuff. So something to think about when you are feeding cattle and trying to take advantage of a ruminant versus a monogastric like a pig or a chicken. So let's look a little bit at some opportunities for being a producer in the cattle industry, especially for some of those of you who are considering entering the business. Let's go through segment by segment. And this is just sort of a basic slide to talk about the beef industry's structure. The central part of this industry is this commercial cow-calf segment, where we have about 31 million cows in the United States. We do have some seed stock producers. Those are people with purebred cattle that supply bulls or semen to a commercial cow-calf producer so they can breed their cows. But ultimately, this is sort of the machine that drives the industry, and we're either producing steer calves or heifer calves. So I've kind of broken this down here to go a little bit slower through this. The vast majority of cattle that are produced, these steer calves, go to a feedlot in this country, go to a packing plant, to a retailer or restaurant, and they're sold to a consumer. But we do have a production of heifer calves who also go to feedlots and to packers. But some of those heifer calves have to go back and provide replacement heifers to make sure that our factory or our commercial cow-calf engine, all these cows are still in production. Because every year about maybe 10%, upwards of 20% of these cows up here go to slaughter because they were not pregnant or they had some sort of problem where they're no longer productive. So that's the traditional beef industry, is producing steer and heifer calves, going to feedlots, being fed grain, and going to packers. But a couple of entities that are increasing in use are two areas. One is called a backgrounder, and the other one is called a yearling or stocker operator. I'll talk more about those here in the next few slides, but these are some areas that a small acreage producer can participate in without having to own a cow herd, and they can basically take an animal produced by a commercial cow-calf producer, add some value to it, and sell it to a feedlot onto a packer. So just to go through the cycle of the beef industry, and which is starting at this cow-calf production level. This is for a winter or spring calving producer. So across the top here are the months of the year, and there's a calving period, a breeding period, and usually a weaning date. So at the top you can see, at least around this part of the country, winter feeding is going to occur probably up till about April. We're going to have a grazing season. We wish it was longer, but we'd be happy to have it be from May till October 1st. There is some fall grazing we'll talk about in October, November, and then back in December we're back to feeding cows in the winter. So some things that are happening along that course, March and April, most producers are calving. It actually goes from about January to June, but the vast majority are sort of March, April. Cows calve, it's wintry, you try to calve unassisted, but it's a time where there are high nutritional needs of the cow. About 60 to 90 days later, you breed those cows. AI, or artificial insemination, is used in about 5% of cases. Natural service, or using a good old bull, is about 95% of the time. And most producers are about the 60 or 90 day season, where the bull is out there for that period of time to try to breed cows so that they have a 9.5-month gestation and they calve back over here in March or April. We try to take advantage of the grazing season with our cows and calves all the way until usually about October, where we wean, and we're producing anywhere from 400 to 600 pound calves, some bigger than that even. Steers are often sold right from the cow-calf producer to a feedlot or backgrounder. Some of the heifers may be kept, some of them may be sold. And then we have those cows that are hopefully pregnant but not lactating, that we have to carry over the winter. So we try to feed them in the fall with low-cost crop residues, but ultimately wind up having to feed them quite a bit of hay over the winter to be able to maintain them over the course of the winter. And that winds up being one of the biggest challenges with the cow-calf operation, is that in any one day over the winter, a cow eats about 25 to 35 pounds a day. And if you say, for the most part, 6 months of the year, you're going to have to feed her, so November to April, you can kind of trim that down to maybe 5 months or 4 months if you're really creative. But you're still looking at 2 to 4 tons of hay to feed to that cow. And the major challenge is it's a time of fetal growth, and it's a time of milk production when she calves around March or so. So you're looking at about $200 to $500 per cow just in wintering cost. Never mind the grazing that you have to do the rest of the year. You have to pay to buy a bull to get her bred, to vaccinate her, to produce that calf. There's a lot of additional costs, but wintering costs, you can see, are pretty substantial for a cow-calf operation. Let's talk a little bit about the weaned calves that are produced in the fall. Typically a heavier weight calf, so probably something that weighs 600-700 pounds, is going to go straight to a feedlot and be fed corn. Lighter weight calves can go into this system, what we call backgrounding. We'll talk about that more in a second, but once they're backgrounded, then they can either go to a feedlot or they can go to grass and graze as a stocker or a yearling animal. A feedlot is somewhere where about 90% of the diet is corn or some very high energy feed like barley or corn or distiller's grains. Cattle are on feed for about 100 days up to about 200 days, depending on how large they were when they came in. And you can get some pretty substantial gains, upwards of 4 pounds a day. So you can imagine a steer in the feed yard for 200 days gaining 3 pounds a day. The challenge is it's become very expensive to gain cattle in a feed yard. Today, it's over $1 per pound of gain. So if you're gaining 3 to 4 pounds a day, you're upwards of $3 to $4 a day just to feed that animal to gain. But it's because it's dependent on corn. And you can see in this diet here in the lower right, in that feed month, it's a very high corn diet. Corn has become very expensive. It's expensive to finish cattle in a feed yard. Most cattle are in at about 700 to 900 pounds and out at 13 to 1500 pounds. Most are sold straight to a packer, and again, I'm talking about the majority of the industry. Later on, I'll suggest that you not sell straight to a packer. You actually take advantage of your some other things and sell straight to a consumer. But remember that a feedlot is a margin operator. They're buying this animal as a calf and selling it as a fed steer at slaughter and putting corn into it. So it's strictly buying and selling, and it has to work within that margin. One of the interesting things about the feed yard business is this is profit or lost by feed yards in the last 30 years. And you can see in the cow-calf business, there was a set of years that was profitable and a set of years that was unprofitable. In the feedlot business, it almost goes flip of the coin one year to the next. And more recently, due to higher corn prices, it can be major losses or major profit. In 03, 04 was a good profit, or major losses. You can see in 08, 09, and even if I had 2010 on here, huge financial losses by the feed yard industry, upwards of $150 to $200 a head. So it's a very risky business to be in, to be feeding cattle in a feedlot. However, let me talk about this backgrounding segment. It's basically what I call a holding pattern, or if you think about an airplane that's going to land at the Denver International Airport and there's not enough room on the ground for that airplane, they put it up in a holding pattern. It flies around in the air till there's room. It's basically that's the same thing for these cattle. It's a spot for lighter weight calves to go for a month to 6 months and be fed a forage-only diet, gain just a little bit from about 500 to 600 pounds, and you sort of get calves over the weaning experience. You train them to the bunk and that sort of thing. But the point here is in this lower left graph that you can see seasonal prices for slaughter animals or fed steers are the highest in March and April and the lowest at the end of the summer. So by holding cattle in one of these little feed yards in the right, you can try to better hit a higher market and stretch out your cattle supply, basically. But so a backgrounder is an option for someone to get some calves for a short period of time, just kind of hold on to them until the market changes and then sell them. But the other, I think, bigger opportunity is this stocker or yearling operation, where basically you only graze cattle for about 2 to 5 months during the growing season, and it is fast and cheap gain, only about 50 cents per pound of gain. They don't gain as much, only 2 pounds per day, but you're doing it at half the price because you're using grass and you're not having to run a feed truck down the alleyway and have somebody go in and check the animals in a pen. You're just having them harvest their own feed. So you start at about 500 or 600 pounds and you end at about 700 or 900 pounds, and the calves will eventually go to a feedlot. It is a margin operator. These producers usually buy calves and sell them, but the benefit is the cost, really the biggest cost they have is grass. And because of that, it is the most profitable beef industry segment. You can see down here at the bottom, these are some cattle in Kansas that are just out grazing. They're a couple of months ago, they were weaned, and they're just gaining weight, waiting to go to a feedlot. But it's a very economical way of adding weight. So I know this is kind of fuzzy, but this is the profitability of this stocker or summer grazing program the last 20 years. And you can see it is highly profitable, and in some years, very highly profitable. And amazingly, you only have to own these cattle for a few months, and you can make over $100 a head on them. You can also lose money, but you can also make a lot of money. And one thing I'll bring up here, and I'll reiterate later, To be successful in this program, the price that you pay for the cattle when you buy them is almost the sole dictator of profit. The saying goes, bought right is half sold. So if you buy them right, if you pay the right price for them up front, you've already locked in your profit. If you pay too much for them up front, you're guaranteed to lose money, even if you're possibly even using free grass. One other point is the reason this segment is so much more profitable than feedlots is because grass and pasture rental rates have not increased nearly to the extent that corn has. There's still quite a bit of available grass out there. You're also not depending on running a feed truck, and burning up diesel fuel and baling hay and harvesting corn and feeding that to cattle. You're depending on the cattle to harvest the intake or the feed. So this is something I think it would be a great thing to consider as a small acreage producer if you don't want to mess around with feeding cows over the winter, is to consider this summer grazing program. I just wanted to cover packers just to finish out this segments of the industry. Packers are basically slaughtering these fed or fat steers and heifers. And those cattle are usually 1,200 to 1,500 pounds. Carcasses are about 62 to 63% of that, so 750 to 950 pounds. And they're usually just over 1 year of age to just under 2 years of age. And that really depends on if they went to a feedlot immediately after weaning or if they went through the backgrounding and stock operation and then to a feedlot to 22 months of age. And I do want to also mention, I didn't talk a lot about it, but the grass finishing component is certainly an option. Not all cattle need to be fed in a feedlot, but you can't grass fatten cattle or grass finish cattle unless you have a market for them. If you grass finish cattle and try to sell them to a major packer, you will be heavily discounted. So there's an opportunity, but only for someone who is a good marketer. On the lower left, I just put in there slaughtering plants that are over 50,000 head a year just to show you how concentrated the industry has become and how few packers there are. And they really buy cattle out of feedlots that are fed corn. Those major packers, that's their bread and butter. So if you were in the commodity business, I'll say, and you're not adding value to your cattle, you're trying to compete with somebody who owns 1,000 calves, you would sell your calves at the livestock auction market. They'll sell from 1 to as many as you have, but you will receive a higher price if you can sell a set of calves that collectively weigh at least 50,000 pounds. So that's 100 500-pound calves, because a tractor trailer fits that many, and that's the cheapest way to ship them somewhere. So that's your economies of scale that you lose out on by being a small producer. Again, these are commodity cattle, no value added. This is just how the business runs. Feedlots are selling slaughter-ready steers straight to a packer, and then cow-calf operations are selling some of their cull animals as well. So I did want to run through here briefly, how many cattle can I graze on my operation? And I know Jennifer here works for NRCS, so I won't go into this very much, but there is a way to determine your available forage supply by going to this website and clicking on this green button, and it helps you look at your specific land and determine how much forage is being produced on that land. Like I say, I won't go through this today, but you basically can go through and identify on a map of the entire United States which is your area. So this is just one farm that somebody highlighted here. And I know that's blurry, but at least gives you an idea of the land that they highlighted. The program looks at the soil types, and it determines how much forage is produced from that piece of land. And then down at the bottom there, number 3, you can actually get a custom printable report and be able to determine how many pounds of forage your property is producing, or at least would typically produce in a given year. So I'm highlighting this so that you can determine how much feed your land produces. Now, to compare against that, you can look at the estimate for demand for forage. So So let's say you have so many pounds of feed, how many animals can you run? So one of the calculations is this animal unit calculation, where an animal unit is a standard animal like a 1,000 pound cow, and she eats 26 pounds of feed per day, and that's dry matter. Hay is about 90% dry matter. Freshly grazed grass is like only 30% dry matter. You then determine an animal unit month, which is this animal unit over the course of 1 month. So we say that cow eats 26 pounds a day, 30 days in a month. She needs 780 pounds in the course of a month. Just to give you a rough idea in terms of how much cattle eat, a dry cow eats about 2 to 3% of its body weight on a dry matter basis. So that's where this 1,000 pound cow, 2.6% of its body weight would be 26 pounds. So now you've determined how many pounds that your one cow will eat. Now, how much of the forage will actually be utilized when you graze it? Can you graze 100% of the forage? No, some of it will be trampled, some of it will be manure or urine, fouled. There's other rodents out there. If you get a grasshopper infestation, they eat some of the grass. So you could say harvest efficiency at the best case in an irrigated pasture, maybe 75%. If you're out on a deserty kind of dry land, maybe just 25%. Even when we mow and bale hay, it's probably only around 90% of the forage is actually harvested and utilized by cattle. So just a quick exercise here. Joe Brummer here at CSU provided this, and it's basically just going through an exercise. Let's say you had a 10-acre irrigated pasture, and I just used an estimated annual yield of 6,000 pounds of feed per acre. And that would be pretty high, but it'd be irrigated, something that was probably fertilized. If it was a dry land pasture, it's probably going to be a quarter or a 1/5 of this, so a lot lower. So you assume that you have a rotation grazing program, about 50% harvest efficiency, so only 50% of the 6,000 is going to be able to be consumed. That's 3,000 pounds. So how many AUMs are available for grazing? What's your supply? So you do 3,000 pounds, 10 acres, you have 30,000 pounds. That animal eats 780 pounds per month. You have 38.5 animal unit months. So what's the demand? How many animal units is that? You just divide over the course of a 6-month growing period, 6.4 animal units. So the take-home message down here at the bottom, I think this is going to be posted online. You can go back and review this later. So this 10 acres that's irrigated, cow-calf pairs grazing on that for 6 months, you could have about 4.5 of them. Likewise, if you had some yearlings or grass cattle, you could have upwards of about 9. And you can see I just took the animal units and divided by the number of animal unit months. 1.45 is higher than 1 because I actually used a 1,200 pound cow with a little calf on its side, so it's greater than a 1. And then down here I used 0.7 for a yearling because a yearling is not as big as a mature cow. So the point I'm trying to make here is on a 10-acre irrigated piece, you can run about 4 cows with calves or about 9 yearlings. If this 10 acres was dry land, basically cut these numbers down to about a quarter of what they are. So about 1 cow and maybe about 2 yearlings. So that's a big thing I think we don't put as much emphasis on is the number of acres you have in forage production versus the number of animals. Everyone has probably seen somebody with 3 acres and 7 horses grazing on it, and just an overuse or abuse of that forage resource. To not abuse your forage resource, this is a great tool to consider. We can go through this more in October if people would have an interest in that, or certainly I'm sure Jennifer could help you with that. So some grazing challenges are there's high forage needs for cows and calves or even yearlings. If it's irrigated, it's probably 2 to 3 acres per animal, all the way down to dry land, 30 to 50 acres per animal. So if you have 30 acres, you need to really consider how productive is that acreage, how many animals can I really run. And in some cases, you may need to consider some options. Buying more land is an option. I'll say it's a bad idea, at least to depend on cattle to pay for it. I'll talk about that in a second. Leasing land is probably the best option, especially if your neighbor has some land, isn't using it. Grazing association is an option, but probably not very likely for most people. So let me just kind of run through a few final comments in terms of some things to consider if deciding whether or not to be in a segment. And I just broke down here the different segments: cow-calf, stocker, feedlot based on corn, a grass finishing enterprise, or a dairy. Are they seasonal? Several of them are. Cow-calf and dairy, absolutely not. It's a year-round business. Are they margin entities? 3 of them in the middle are stocker, feedlot, and grass. Basically, you're buying cattle and selling them. A cow-calf or a dairy, you have to make the investment in the original factory, the cow herd that's going to produce calves for you. And so it's not really a margin, it's an investment. Cost to get into that segment, cow-calf, it's high because you have to today go out and buy cows. And you are never going to get that money back until you exit the business in however many years from now. Costs for stocker or feedlot, stocker or grass finishing are medium. You have to come up with some sort of money to pay for the cattle you're buying, but you'll get that back at the end of the season. A feedlot's high cost because you have to build a feedlot and pens and feed delivery system. A dairy is very high. It's a very intensive production. You have milking equipment and that sort of thing. So risk, is there a lot of risk associated? I would say cow-calf is moderate risk. Hay price is going to be a big issue. That's my next slide, is determining what influences profit. A stocker is probably the lowest risk because you're simply buying cattle and selling them in a very short amount of time. Feedlot is very high risk. Corn price is very volatile, and that can really determine your profit. Grass finishing, I think, is medium risk just because if you don't have cattle sold and marketed properly, you won't make the money that you would like to. And dairy is very high risk. Milk prices are very volatile. Corn prices are very volatile. So that's kind of what this table tries to do, is look at those same segments, cow-calf all the way down to dairy, what skills are needed, what equipment's needed, and then what drives profit. And I'd say in the cow-calf and dairy, you need a lot of skills. I didn't have enough room to list them all. Everything from nutrition to reproduction to health, all of those kind of things. Some of these stocker and grass finishing, you need to be a really good grazer and really good at marketing or handling animals. Don't forget, if you have a stocker operation, you're buying animals. You don't know much history on them. You have to be very careful you get good dispositions, especially if you're running on the neighbor's place and the fences aren't very good. You can get in a big mess. You need to know how to handle animals. In a feedlot, animal health is a big issue. You can get into some digestive problems if you're not feeding cattle properly. Equipment needed. In cow-calf, you need a lot of equipment for feeding, handling, that sort of thing. Dairy, you have to build pens, have milking equipment, handle manure. Lots of equipment is needed. The stocker and the grass finishing components, you need to be a good fencer, and you need to be able to have a good truck and trailer to be able to haul cattle back and forth and move them around. So not a lot of equipment needed in those areas. A feedlot needs quite a bit of equipment, like a dairy would, to be able to feed cattle in a pen. So what's driving profit in each of these segments? Cow-calf profit is going to be driven by hay price and calf price. So if you can reduce hay price, you'll do better. If you can sell your calves for more money, you'll do better. Stocker operator, it's almost all purchase price that's going to influence profit. Feedlot, it's profit and it's corn. And recently it's been more corn than anything is driving profit. Grass finishing, purchase price is big, but it's also ability to market. You can't sell grass-finished cattle to a packer for any more money than a feedlot that fed them corn would, and you have a lot more invested than they would. Profit drivers in the dairy business, milk price and corn price are by far the two. So just a couple of last slides here. To me, the opportunities for the small acreage producer is you have to be successful financially, is to not be a commodity producer. And a commodity producer is someone who just competes with the largest cow-calf operations and tries to have the lowest break even. But unfortunately, I think you're never going to be low cost enough. And if you go and purchase a piece of land in this country, there's really no piece of land that you can buy and make cattle pay for it alone. You have to do something else with that land. There's not enough profit in cattle to pay for a land purchase, especially in any kind of urban type of area. So you're required, and this is again, if you're trying to be profitable, you're required to add value by really not selling at a livestock auction market, but rather selling directly to consumers. And that's grass-finished cattle, maybe grain-finished cattle, but use some of these value-adding options at the bottom. Try to focus on the local aspect and farmers markets. Grass finishing, that's a unique advantage that you can provide. Use your network, whether it's at work or at school or through family. And there's a lot of wealthy people in this area that you just need to be connected with and provide them this grass-finished, local, maybe even organic beef. And the big thing is what's referred to as story beef. It's beef that has a story. We know where it came from. We know how it was handled. And that is what people are basically seeking. So I had a couple other slides, but I'm going to hold off on those based on the time, and would invite anybody to ask any questions, and certainly would appreciate any input relative to what people would like out of some program possibly this fall.
Okay, thanks, Jason. So while you're thinking about some questions, I just wanted to give some more information about the workshop in October that Jason mentioned a few times. So this is the first of a series of livestock webinars that we're going to have throughout the summer. And then in October 15th is the date, somewhere in the Front Range, we haven't determined yet. We're going to have a full day Saturday livestock workshop, which will be kind of a follow-up to all these webinars, where we'll be able to have time to learn more in depth about these different type of livestock. And so the upcoming webinars that are coming up next are sheep and goats on August 11th, poultry is on August 29th, alpacas and llamas August 31st, and then swine production is on September 29th. And these are all posted on the Small Acreage website, and I'll also go ahead and email these to all of you after today. So I guess we can just go ahead and get started with some questions. Let's see. So we determined small acreage is 1 to 100 acres generally in Colorado anyway, because many acres are dry land, so you need a lot more in order to do anything with them. So the next question is, let's see. So we posted the Web Soil Survey website. So Olivia asks, do you have an idea of an average initial purchase price of stock or calf, average price when sold to feedlot?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm glad to see that, because it sort of indicates to me you're trying to do the break-even analysis, and that's perfect. When you go back online and look at these slides, I think it's the like 9th slide, and it's price comparisons, and I'd encourage you to look at that. But basically, across the nation right now, the average 550-pound calf, which would be a classic calf to go to a stocker operator out on grass, is about $1.50 or $1.48 per pound, which is what Ruth brought up here on the slide. So you're basically buying them for about $1.48 a pound, or $148 a hundredweight. So I don't have my calculator here, but that's going to be somewhere around $800 per head if you multiply 550 times 148. So that's what you're buying them for. You're going to add 200 pounds and sell them as that 750-pound feeder steer, and that national average right now is $1.30 a pound, or $130 a hundredweight. So if you do that math, you could figure out that's somewhere upwards of $1,000 or something like that. So I would encourage you to go through and try to watch those numbers. USDA has a lot of market reports on both of those numbers. Obviously, they're going to vary in different parts of the country. This is a national average, but you can see that the average price per pound goes down, but from 550 pounds to 750 pounds, it's only costing you like 50 cents a pound to add that weight. So you can add like $200 onto an animal's value for about $100 in cost. So good question. I did see another question there about I think the price of or the quality of hay. There it is. If only feeding grass or alfalfa to lactating mid-sized cows, what grade of hay is needed? Great question. Interestingly, alfalfa is pretty much like ice cream to cows. It provides more than they would ever need. In reality, it provides more than double the protein they would need, and it provides more energy than they need. So if you have alfalfa, that's great. But the demand for alfalfa, like if you sell it at a hay auction or something like that, you can actually be able to make money selling alfalfa and then buy back maybe some corn stalks and mix alfalfa with corn stalks. And therefore, you're bringing the average protein down, you're bringing the average energy down, you're bringing the average price down. And so therefore, you can basically save yourself quite a bit of money. So there's a lot of combinations on that. Buying a little bit of poor quality hay and mixing with some better alfalfa is a great option. Really, most kinds of grass hay are borderline for protein. So sometimes you need to put a little bit of protein in front of them if it's just kind of cow hay. But that's something we'll probably cover this fall in October is determining what that is exactly.
And speaking of this workshop coming up in October, we have a follow-up series of questions that we wanted to ask to help Jason develop his presentation for October. So hopefully you can just take a couple minutes here before we continue with the questions. The first question is, please rate your knowledge of beef and dairy cattle production after the presentation. So just to show how well we did on educating you, or how well Jason did in this short amount of time talking about beef and dairy production. And then the next question is, do you plan to use the skills presented within the next year? And then finally, and this really will help us kind of determine what we're going to talk more about at the workshop in October, is what do you still want to learn more about? So go ahead and take your time and do that. And we'll leave that poll up for a few moments as we continue with the next question here. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, it looks like the next question is from Jenny Stricker. Suggestions for where small acreage landowners might go to find sources of stocker cattle. Smart tips for purchasing stockers.
Yeah, good question. Most feedlots go to a sale barn and buy them there because there's large volumes, that sort of thing. But there's almost zero information coming on those cattle. Were they vaccinated? Have they been sick before? What's their disposition? Anything like that. So I would say if you're going to be running stocker cattle, you're better to do it private treaty, and that's going to be either through an ad in a newspaper, approaching people locally, or somehow, if you did want to go to a sale barn, livestock auction market, to try to find out in advance cattle that are coming in, and the sale barn will tell you that they have maybe 10 Angus calves coming in from so-and-so, and you can try to go find that information. But I think it's better, honestly, especially for a small operator, to avoid the risk of health and disposition problems by going and developing a relationship with someone to be your supplier. And then ultimately, if things go well, you go back next year and you buy them again. And so you basically work over time to try to develop a relationship and improve the quality of cattle that you get. And then in terms of smart tips for buying them, your obviously health is probably a number one concern. Weight is a big issue. Again, bought right is half sold. So what you pay for them is going to dictate your profit. And then the other thing would be, make sure you know what you're getting into. If you buy 10 head and one of them dies, that's probably your profit. So really be risk averse on trying to do that.
And just to point this out, we just noticed that we had the first question up there. Half of the question was from this presentation, and then half was from the last one we did on high tunnels. So sorry about the confusion there. Okay, so let's move on here. Are there breeds for all grass fed?
Yeah, good question. Breeds for all grass fed? I would say no, because really at this point most breeds provide beneficial things. But I would argue that Hereford and Angus cattle, or British cattle, there's other British breeds of cattle, inherently have more tenderness in them than what we call continental breeds. Continental breeds being Limousin, Charolais, Simmental, Gelbvieh, those kind of things. So, but at the same time, Angus and Hereford cattle gain slower than continental cattle. So ideally, I would say probably some combination of the two. But if palatability is a big issue, if you're selling beef to people that are going to come back to you and give you a report on that, you do need probably half of their genetics to be British, at least. That's why things like certified Angus beef, certified Hereford beef are so popular, is because they're genetically programmed to be a little bit more palatable.
All right, Dennis Lamb has the next question. I feed out my own calves on grain and market them at 12 to 14 months of age. A neighbor buys weaning calves and feeds them on grass and markets them at 20 to 24 months of age. Do my additional feed costs offset the additional time it takes to feed his calves? That's good.
Yeah, good question. And I would say, if someone is feeding them right from weaning until slaughter, if grain continues to be at the level it is, it's probably going to be harder and harder to make that profitable. And that's why we're seeing more and more cattle go to these stocker operator type of places and basically add weight via grass. And then the rule of thumb is cattle need a minimum of 100 days of grain feeding to provide beef that would be consistent with grain-fed beef in this country. 200 days versus 100 days, if they're the same weight at the end point, it doesn't matter. 100 days minimum will get you to that point. So I would say it's going to mostly be dictated by what the price of grain is and what you're paying for that. But it seems to be, going forward, the more you can gain cattle on grass, the longer you can gain them on grass, the more profitable you're going to be. But just make sure if you're feeding grain-fed cattle, 100 days or more of grain feeding.
The next question is from Don. If pasture reclamation is needed before implementing a rotational grazing program, what is a good seed mix to plant?
Good question, Don, and you're going to get pretty quick to my lack of experience in that area. I think, I was going to say probably Jennifer would be a little better on that.
So, Don, it really depends on where you are and your soil types and a couple, the altitude and everything else. So why don't you go ahead and contact me? You should have my email address, and I can get you the right information. Or if, depending on where you are, you can contact your local extension or NRCS office, and either agency will be able to help you. All right, Joyce Bunker, we hear a lot about upcoming regulations related to carbon footprint and the like caused by cattle. What is the likelihood of additional regulation costs stemming from this?
Yeah, that's a big issue, is carbon footprint, and that's something a lot of people are trying to do right now, actually CSU included, is try to quantify the carbon footprint between conventional grain-fed cattle and grass-fed finished cattle. And then to see, if cattle are run through a stocker operator before going to feedlot, does that influence carbon or not? You have to factor in transportation and a truck running down the road and burn up diesel and all that sort of thing. So it's very, very elaborate calculations. So I think there's two views that I have. Is one of them is there is a value added aspect that's coming to play related to carbon footprint. There's a a couple of scenarios where you actually can document the carbon footprint of your beef through either selling a carbon credit by trying to go through some of these carbon, can't remember what the word is, but sort of a clearinghouse. They'll sell carbon credits for you. Or there's even some groups that'll verify cattle as being green cattle, and that you are following certain protocols on your grazing scenario to improve or reduce the carbon emissions. And therefore, they'll actually market your cattle in a grocery store as sort of green verified cattle. So there is consumer demand for it. It's still pretty small, I think. And personally, I think we're a long way from seeing regulation at the cow or cattle level related to carbon footprint, but it's certainly moving that direction. I think most producers feel they would rather see it be driven by a capitalist kind of marketplace where there's demand for it and people will change based on that. But I think ultimately, I think people realize there probably will be some sort of regulation at the carbon level. And so I think that's actually, I guess my point I leave with is it's a great opportunity for someone who's a small acreage producer to try to even quantify some of that stuff and even maybe add value to your cattle by marketing that. And you know, honestly, it's groups like Whole Foods and stores like that that those consumers are paying a price. Walmart, I'm not sure there's that demand, and it's not going to be there for some time.
Yeah, it's a good discussion, though. The next question is from Carrie. Let's see. I have Scottish Highland cattle and am debating whether to pursue the seed stock route or grass-fed beef route. Any thoughts?
Yeah, we didn't talk a lot about the seed stock business, but interestingly, a lot of smaller producers wind up being seed stock producers because they'll go and they'll buy a purebred animal that's registered and they'll AI it and then have a registered calf. And maybe even sell a heifer to somebody else as a replacement or sell a bull to somebody else to use on their operation. Versus if you're a commercial cow-calf operation, your cows have no papers and you're just selling their offspring basically ultimately to slaughter or to go back into your herd. So, you know, the big things on that are two things. One is the upfront cost. A purebred registered animal is going to cost probably at least 50% more than a commercial unregistered animal, sometimes even twice as much. The quality of bull or semen that you use would need to be higher and therefore more expensive. And so, but at the same time, the opportunities for more income are greater. But that's where the other point comes into play is you need to be someone who is by nature somewhat of a marketer and you know who to sell your animals to. It doesn't make sense to be a seed stock producer and go to the sale barn and sell your animals there. You're going to get the same as somebody who had an unregistered cow that just any old bull bred her. So I think if you have a little bit more money up front and the expertise to be able to add value to those, you can make more money as seed stock. But the comparison here is seed stock or grass fed. And you're mentioning Highland cattle. I'm not sure there's a clear answer on that. There's not a lot of Highland cattle around. If you're a good marketer, you can get a lot of people excited about buying Highland cattle because of their looks and their hardiness and that sort of thing. But at the same time, grass-fed Highland cattle probably make a pretty good grass-fed animal. They may not grow as fast as you'd like them, and their carcass won't be quite as heavy, so it might be a little, your income might be cut back a little bit, but ideally you could even go seed stock and grass-fed, and then you would sell your culls as grass-fed, and then your better animals as seed stock, because you have to realize almost half the animals produced on a seed stock operation are culled and go to slaughter. We only really sell the better half, so in an ideal world, you do both.
Okay, I think that's the last question I'm seeing. You can go ahead and type in any other questions if you'd like. And also, Jason asks that you put in the comment box if you're thinking of attending the workshop in October and there are other topics that were not listed, that you just go ahead and comment, you know, other things that you're interested in learning more about. And again, I apologize about the confusion for the first poll question that we had there. It looks like someone's typing, so we'll hold on for a little bit longer. Okay, when in October will the workshop be? It'll be October 15th. We're just not sure of the location yet, but it'll be October 15th, which is a Saturday, and probably be in either Larimer County or Adams County at the fairgrounds. So I'll post more information about that workshop. I have all of your emails, so I'll make sure you all are informed when the details are determined. Okay, it looks like other people are just mentioning what they'd like to learn more about. So I guess with that, we'll say thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on the next webinar is not until August 11th on sheep and goats. So I hope to see you then. Thanks.